Okay, all right.
I'm Harrison Height.
I'm Whit Morley.
I'm Keshav.
I'm Danny Goldfarb.
Okay, and we're all seniors at St. Paul Academy in our class working on the BRIC nations. And I don't know if you guys would use the BRICS acronym in India, but we're familiar. It's Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and it's been expanded recently now. They tacked another I in there for Indonesia and added an S at the end for South Africa. But we're really focusing on the original BRIC bloc more than on the whole six-nation BRICS curriculum. And so the term was coined by Goldman Sachs, and I think the idea is that those are the nations that are growing most economically and that are being targeted for Western investment.
Yeah, well, we just are going to read our discussion question here so that we can talk about something that's interesting. In what specific ways can Indian government be reformed?
So, we're reading this book by Fareed Zakaria, The Post-American World. And according to Fareed Zakaria, and we'll quote from page 134 here in his chapter, The Ally, which deals with India, quote, India's growth is taking place not because of the government, but despite it. It is not top-down, but bottom-up, messy, chaotic, and largely unplanned. The country's key advantages are genuine private sector, established rights of property and contact, independent courts, and the rule of law, even if it is often abused. India's private sector is the backbone of its growth, end quote.
Well, I think personally that doesn't mean that the government can't help out the Indian situation. That just because that so far it hasn't been largely responsible for the growth of India, I still think that reforms in education, something that he talks about in here, about how education is mainly funded by private organizations, at least the growth of education is. And so instead of having NGOs responsible for the growth of education, I think that that's something that the government really should be working on, because education is one of the foundations of a good economy. The United States has it, Western Europe has it, Japan has it, and China is beginning to have it. And so those are really what is the backbone. I think that the government really should be stepping in on that.
You brought a point up in your discussion about the kind of added sentiments of nationalism for teachers who are working at government-funded educational facilities. And I agree with what you said, which was essentially that there's a lack of motivation. There's essentially, these teachers are placed in a situation in which there's no primary incentive to work. And, that's a problem. So there could be some reform of policies which pertain to the teachers of government-funded schools.
What do you mean by that?
Reforms, it could be many things, I guess. One of the things that you mentioned was that they could not be fired. So perhaps we could...
Wait, they cannot be fired?
Yeah, isn't that what they...
It's sort of like you have tenure, even if you're...
As a government employee.
Exactly.
Even if you're drinking coffee for half the day and not showing up to work, you get your paycheck.
Which is clearly an unfortunate system, and that really isn't at all, I don't think, the way it should be. And so that's probably step one that the government needs to take, because it's really an immediate action. And I don't see it being a huge issue to hire some, administrators or investigators, people who, keep tabs, like the inspectors. The school system has a definite hierarchy here. There's like a superintendent who hires a bunch of inspectors, and it's very much like that's the way it goes. And
by here, you mean in the United States?
That's what I meant with.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. So what I was saying, there's a hierarchy, and if you're always directly responsible to your supervisor, and if you're not doing a good job, you're not going to last very long. And so you don't really have that tenure of a government employee. I mean, you're not any more safe in your job than anybody else is. And so, if you're doing a good job, odds are you won't be fired. So yeah, you do have job security if you're doing a good job, but you don't have job security for slacking off all day, which sounds to me from the flavor of your discussion as if that is the problem in India. So I would say the way to go about that is establish this more hierarchical structure.
But the issue there is that, and that sounds like a good idea, except for the bottom line of corruption in the case of, I mean, you really need to get rid of corruption in order to have that actually work. And so if you don't eliminate some sort of corruption, I mean, how do you know that the superintendents won't actually be sitting around also? I mean, we can't really guarantee that that would work versus, I mean, and it sounds like that's not the only problem in India. I mean, you have other things where there just aren't enough schools. I mean, you don't even have enough teachers. They talked about how the number of students in the classroom was extremely high compared to the student-to-teacher ratio is extremely high. And so, I mean, I think that those are other things that India really, the government really needs to take a role in. The government needs to reform that. That shouldn't just be NGOs doing that. That should be the government stepping in. And so I think that's one of the major things that the government really needs to take a step toward.